Roga Gold, are you all here?
Hi, we are all here and present.
Great. Opposition, are you all here?
Yep, all here and present.
Okay, cool. We can start with introductions then. So, my name is Amira. I will be your chair for this open grand final. One of the judges has a mic issue. So I'll just be introducing them on their behalf. So one of the panelists' name is Mishka. There's also three other panelists, I believe, if they would like to introduce themselves.
I am Arit. Good luck with the round.
Hi, I'm Maya.
Hello, I'm Pablo. Good luck.
Okay, great. I think that settles it then. Um, Yeah. So without further ado, I think no use on just repeating house rules. Like I think everyone knows that it's 8-minute speeches. Everyone knows when to give POI. So I would just expect both teams to be accustomed to that. So without further ado, let's not waste more time. Proposition first, whenever you're ready to start this final.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes to both.
Sure, I'll take POIs in the chat, please. I'll start on my first word. Panel. At the end of the day, the world is plagued by gender constructs. It is a world in which during the formative years of a young girl's childhood, she is told she must marry young. She is told that education isn't her priority. It is when Andrew Tate tells young boys they must be strong, never cry, and never be emotional that those are the real impacts of gender constructs. Proposition's baseline is we don't tell you who you are. It is never in our right to do so. You get to decide that. It is never in our right to determine someone else's path nor how they should perceive themselves. First, one piece of framing, then three arguments in my speech. First, then, what is the status quo? In the status quo, individuals lack any real autonomy over gender. Gender is legally and socially assigned at birth before a person gains consciousness, develops preferences, or has any understanding of self. This assignment is not neutral. It immediately becomes a fixed identity that shapes your expectations, behavior, and life paths. There is no country which is fully liberal. No matter whether it's conservative or liberal, gender constructs still exist. This motion specifically uses it towards the entire world. This means everyone in the entire world is using this application. I think anything about conservatism or liberalism specifically is kind of off clash. First argument then. And what is the inherent issue with status quo? I'm going to give you several mechanisms. First, no, I said in chat. First, the status quo heterosexual gender identification system fails to account for individual biological changes. Gender is assigned at birth based on a narrow reading of physical traits and assumes stable binary biology. In reality, biological development is dynamic. Hormone levels change significantly over time, especially during things like puberty, and bodies do not develop in uniform and predictable ways. Despite this, the status quo locks individuals into a fixed gender category long before these biological processes stabilize, forcing them to live under the expectations that may directly contradict how their bodies and capacities later develop. Second, prescribing gender from birth traps individuals in an identity crisis. Many people only develop their real personality traits, values, and sense of self by the time they're around 18. However, the status quo imposes a gendered identity from the very beginning and reinforces it continuously through social norms and institutions. When individuals later realize this imposed identity does not align with who they are or who they want to be, they face conflict, shame, and pressure to conform or justify themselves. On our comparative, people can experience that similar feeling. For example, from a kid, I realized that, oh, I really like doing girly things. I can experience a similar feeling for 18 years and then decide after the constant feeling. But third, the isolation that society imposes upon a person who doesn't know what they are. Usually, when you're a gender minority, you always want to find a safe place. For example, if you're a gay person, you go to gay bars. But in the process of identification, you don't know who you are, so you're isolated. So on comparative, when everyone doesn't know, members who are part of this community are more welcoming, and they won't discriminate against people who don't know. And last, it's super hard to change your gender. This is why it should be uniquely gender that's changed in status quo. We have a lot of arbitrary factors in our life. Like, for example, I may grow up poor or I may go to the wrong school, but those factors can be changed to other things. Like, I can start up poor, but become a successful CEO and become rich. But gender is the one thing that's extremely hard to change, and therefore it's the one thing that's constant in your life and constantly perhaps hindering you. Second argument then, on gender determines large societal structures and reduces your identity. Firstly, in status quo, gender determines many core societal structures by prescribing what a man and woman are expected to do in their lives. This grooming process starts from a very young age. Children are taught explicitly and implicitly what is appropriate for their gender in terms of behavior, ambition, and life goals. Gender, therefore, becomes a set of rules rather than a neutral descriptor, reducing identity to fitting into a narrow social box instead of allowing individuals to develop freely. Let me give you some illustration. Let's say you take a young child growing up in a household. If the child is identified as girl, she may be encouraged to help with domestic work, be taught to be quiet and obedient, and repeatedly told that stability comes from marriage rather than career. At the same time, in the same household, a boy in the same family is pushed to be assertive, focus on earning money, and discouraged from showing emotional vulnerability. None of these expectations are chosen by the children. They're imposed before the child can even speak or understand alternatives. Secondly, most individuals do not have the ability to resist these structures during childhood. Gender norms are enforced by people with moral authority. Parents, teachers, religious leaders, and children are dependent on them for safety, approval, and resources. A child cannot realistically push back against these expectations because doing so risks a loss of support. As a result, they're internalized as normal rather than imposed. But why is this unique to that specific growing phase? Childhood is the most malleable phase of your life because of things like neurological plasticity, dependence on authority, and constant repetition that converge hardwired norms into behavior and identity. Children lack the capacity to critically assess the rules and instead absorb them no matter what they say. Because conformity is rewarded and deviation is punished, these norms are reinforced through daily language, discipline, and social cues. Over time, repeated behaviors become habits, and your habits shape who you are. For example, a boy taught not to cry does not merely suppress his emotion, but emotional restraint becomes his default response to other situations in life and part of his personality. By adulthood, these early adaptations feel innate rather than learned. The impact is threefold. First, these early constraints shape major life decisions for you without a choice. Occupational choices are limited, aspirations are lowered, and family decisions are predetermined. For example, girls being pushed towards early marriage or told that long-term education is unnecessary, e.g. they drop out of 12th grade. Families may intentionally restrict your opportunities, not because of the kid's ability, but because of gender. Secondly, deeper impact is the erosion of identity itself, because gender indoctrination happens in childhood when personality, emotional defaults, and everything are forming. Girls repeatedly are taught to be obedient, internalizing the expectation to be suppressed by the patriarchy. The boys are taught to be aggressive, continuing to maintain patriarchal structures. By adulthood, these patternhoods change your identity completely, leaving them no autonomy. Our comparative is simple. Children are able to explore their gender and identity, and they're able to do things independently. Their actions are more flexible and imaginative. They can try different things that may come from different genders, allowing them to experiment and develop their identity on their own, which I think is a human right that everyone has. It's the one thing you're able to control about yourself. Third argument then quickly on how societal structures now have to change. First, opposition cannot assert that people will suddenly change once gender perception returns at 18. Principally, they've already made irreversible assessments. So if families invest in them now when they're children, then they probably cannot take back those investments when they're 18. It's irrational and costly for them to do so to reverse course the moment a kid chooses their gender. But secondly, most of the harm the opposition will assume will occur after gender is revealed is unlikely because there's no longer an incentive or end goal to impose restrictive gender norms. In the growing up phase, gender norms exist to shape you, but now you're an adult with established autonomy, established critical thinking. There's no way you're able to actively shape your mind in that malleable way. At this stage, individuals now have bargaining power, mobility, and alternatives. So even if gender becomes visible later, the damage that opposition fears cannot replace the structural harm of childhood gendering because the window where the maximum control and dependency existed has already passed. The impact is simple. Societies that rely on early gender identification is removed. Schools can never train children based on their assumed gender roles, so they must allocate opportunities and expectations equally based on the individual ability and interests themselves. This changes how educational pathways and whatnot are designed in most cases. But second, I think it's really important because now there's no incentive to impose general norms, and for that, proud to stand on side proposition.
Thank you so much for that fine speech. I'd like to now call upon Leader of Opposition to start the up bench. Here.
Just to check, am I audible and visible?
Yes to both.
Okay. Pronunciation, your voice verbal. If a society tells you that you ought to act a certain way if you're a girl, then society will tell you to act a certain way if you're born a Black person. If a community tells you that women should not pursue STEM, it will also tell an Indigenous individual that they shouldn't either. The problem was never with what you were born as, it was with the way society operated. Because proposition doesn't remove bigotry and discrimination, they either delay it or shift it to something else. At the end of the day, societal rules still exist, there will just be less momentum to fight them on proposition. Few points aside then. Firstly, you vote on opposition. We like to maintain status quo where gender and sex are known for people from birth. And note, within these frameworks, there's already been a lot of work done to make society more accommodating for women and gender minorities. And these forms of advocacy can only persist when gender is instituted as a social construct from birth, because prejudices faced would not need to deal with that. Our role is one where progress against harassment or inequality against women is increasingly better, right? Women now outperform men in all levels of education and drop out far less from school. Women in STEM fields constitute 4 times more than the number they were just a decade ago, and gender-based violence and workplace harassment are also on the decline as countries institute feminist policies. The society in which they talk about on proposition, in which girls are pushed to early marriage or education restrictions, have far deeper problems, and those problems will still manifest when you're able to interpret your gender at 18 anyway, and will still exist on the other side. I'm unclear why they suddenly disappear, given that the societal structures themselves are patriarchal and are conservative that push you to confine women into these spots. They have to give mechanisms for that. They have not. Secondly, what is the role in proposition? Note, on proposition, individuals are blind to all interpretations of gender. So you will not be able to explore your sexuality or figure out what specific orientation you are until you're 18. On our side, if you're born a man, but you're curious about your form of attraction or whether being a man suits you, you can explore those freely on our side. And there are guides or people under 18 who have spoken about those things online that help you navigate these things. We think this constitutes a large part of a person's life and identity, and delaying it is ultimately harmful for youth. The other side supports this weird thing where you can be girly and then at 18 you suddenly choose to be a gender. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think the moment you know what your gender is at birth, it helps you form the conception of what your actual true sexuality or your true gender is, and the exploration of that cannot be denied to individuals. And finally, this isn't a this house prefers motion. This wasn't invented from the beginning of time. Gender norms and patriarchal structures still exist in society after 18, and proposition still has to engage with that role where people still build conceptions of gender and are discriminated because they are born in a certain way. Finally, 2 arguments. First, on why this doesn't deal with the core problems faced with society today. Before that, I'll take a POI.
Our first very clearly engaged with that yes, we accept there are still gender constructs, they exist on our side. The point is, as a child in your formative years, you don't feel obligated nor confined to one singular gender construct. Why aren't you engaging with this?
Okay, perfect. I'll deal with both of these things in my arguments, but the simple answer is that the structures still exist, so the rules enforced by those structures will still exist. They will just be delayed or they will be moved to something else like your race. First argument then on why this doesn't deal with the core problems that society face. First, I want to know the problems that will still persist on their side. Children will still build conceptions of gender stereotypes. They see how gendered adults interact with one another, and social structures still bear expectations of gender, like narratives in society that men are stronger, or even works of literature and movies that children watch from young that show portrayals of men doing these things. These things still exist and will be consumed, and the content they consume will still have gender stereotypes within them. But secondly, toxic support for masculinity would exist and might end up becoming worse. Opposition says that support for toxic male influencers wouldn't exist, but we like to challenge this. We don't see why these influencers who are coming from a place of bigotry who suddenly have their bigotry disappeared the moment they know that everybody under 18 doesn't have a like gender known, right?
Point.
These influencers can still point to the contributions of men in status quo, can still point to the stories of men that are being oppressed as adults, and can still use those things to generate momentum for their causes. And the conceptions and biases that you develop are likely to transcend the identity assigned to you at 18, right? So even if you turn out to be a woman, the perceptions of women's roles in society that were pushed upon you will still remain. Like in the manosphere, influences like Andrew Tate still exist, or conservative influences explaining why gender roles are good for society will still exist. And as long as individuals are driven to them due to the same factors that exist now, those biases will still hold up. But now, since you think you could be a man, his views and rhetoric resonate with you, because even if you discover you are a woman, those beliefs are now so core to you because they were foundational to you when you were growing up that you end up being a patriarchal sympathizer because you do not have the relatability to the suffering of women that will be expressed when you know you are born a woman. All the content you grew up with that frames men as heroes or masculinity as superior still stick with you. Secondly, what are problems that become far worse on their side as a result of this machine? This assumes Prop's best case where gender blindness can be perfectly implemented. What does gender blindness hinder you from fighting for an equal society? One is that it reduces urgency for change to happen. Children are uniquely in a vulnerable group that elicits strong emotional reactions in society and bolsters incentive to response. Like the thought of 13-year-old girls getting dress coded for the supposed benefit of their male counterparts is more likely to elicit outrage at the double standards of gender society than if those similar things were enforced to you when you're older, right? On the comparative, when issues are non-gendered, it reduces the urgency to care about these things from a legislative and enforcement standpoint because there are less people that are willing to resonate with them and willing to stand out against them because they don't have the unique biological like proximity to those things. Secondly, it also reduces intersectional change. Gender-based movements also have heavy intersection with racial equality or queer rights movements. The non-existence of these movements or a lack of need for them would only harm advocacy for intersectional groups, as you cannot advocate for minorities, like minorities of people of color, because you do not have the urgency generated from youth movements that come out of gender-based things, right? And thirdly, the feminist movement becomes far weaker. A large supporter base for the feminist movement is from those under 18. It's high school students and colleges students that go out and protest because they aren't bound to a job, or high schools that become breeding grounds for these thoughts. The feminist movement relies on telling stories, and the relatability of these stories depend on you being from that gender, or the action that you take and the urgency at which you take that action depend on the risk you know because of the experiences you have by being a certain gender. What is the impact to society? I think there are increased efforts to call out patriarchal gender stereotypes, slowly change the social perception of gender, and as a whole, because there is momentum to call out these things if you're a woman from a young age, you build up the awareness to call out other forms of discrimination that do not relate to gender as well. At best, proposition gets no benefit, but they skewer the pathway to obtaining change and all forms of equality within society because momentum for pushing for equality and creating a better society is reduced because, as they claim, they solve it already. Second argument then, why having a gender and sexual identity known before 18 is fundamentally meaningful. First layer is that the exploration of gender constitutes a large part of someone's life. It's the formation of their own identity, it increases their self-confidence and security within society, and allows them to ascertain their place in the world. They know what they ought to do and what they want to do based on the things that they were, like perfect information they were given since birth. Why should we ought to preserve this? One, individuals will feel less dissonance with their own identity. Propositions comparative hides a part of your identity from you that inherently breeds a sense of confusion within yourself and confusion within society. If I did not know my gender from birth, I think I'm likely to feel like a large part of myself is locked out until I reach the arbitrary age of 18. I'm unclear why this is happening. I'm likely to feel a lot of dissonance. But secondly, the most formative moments of a person's life happens while they are still a child. And children have the time to explore their own identity and truly find out their identity. And most people bring the things that they've learned in their childhood to their adulthood. So when I know that I'm born male from birth, I can interact with that. And when I continue to get interactions or experiences in my adult life or in my childhood, I can engage with those things knowing that I'm born a male. And thirdly, we already don't limit access to information in the status quo, right? Here's the principal parallel for why it's justified. Like we don't have public information on, like we have public information on genocide for people to build your conceptions of it because we know it's and recognize it's important for you to know the full horrors of society or the full truth about society so that you grow up more informed or that your childhood is more informed. And we still hold strong notions of race, nationality, and sexuality, even though those are ultimately arbitrary and arguably can cause harm, because we recognize they are significant to personhood and recognize the importance of identity and being a part of your identity to your growth and your development in adulthood. For all those reasons, side with opposition.
Thank you so much for that speech. I'd like to now call upon Deputy Prime Minister here.
Just 10 seconds. Okay, am I audible?
Yep, you are.
Okay. Preferred pronouns she, her. I'll take my POIs verbally. I'm not looking at the chat, and I'll start on my first word. I want to make two things clear at the top of my speech. First, what is the harm of societal constructs in of itself? Why is it far bigger than everything opposition characterized to you? One, note how they literally admitted that construct determine things like identities. They literally admitted that knowing what your gender is helps you have more confidence in what your career path is. I find this incredibly problematic for three reasons. The first is this is them verbatim admitting to you that societal gender construct tell you how to behave. The issue with this is that for the average individual, if you don't identify with this, you are shackled to it. The second issue with this is that as a child, because they literally admit you are confined to certain career paths. For example, teaching is often something women are told to join into, or being a nurse. Men, you are told to become a construction worker or something like that. Very masculine roles. The primary issue with this then is you are limited for your freedom of expression of identity. You can't explore other career paths. What if you are majorly talented in another area? You are unable to explore it because you are confined to it. The third thing is interest in of itself. It is a fundamental right of any individual to explore interest, and it is a principal thing that is good for society because you got
Sure.
diversification of career paths. Opposition significantly limits it because they allow children to be aware that because I'm a girl, I must confine to this. Don't let them get away by saying, but oh, these constructs still exist in society. Yes, but you don't feel like because I have a vagina, I must be confined to this. You can choose what construct you want to opt into and what your identity is. The point is, as a child, you can choose your career path and your identity. The second thing I want to highlight is why constructs exclusively provide more confusion. Because if their idea is not having it provides confusion, here are two reasons as to why it's worse on their comparative. The first primary reason this is because at a small age you are unable to comprehend why something must be assigned to a certain gender. You are unsure as to why you must be forced down this career path, and that is actively far more confusing. The second thing I want to highlight is I'm not sure what is so confusing about knowing your passion. I'm unsure as to why you must know your gender and like what's your biological like makeup to know what passion you is. As a child, you can tell what you're passionate about, what clubs you like at school, because on our side you are exclusively given the chance to explore these paths. On their side, you are forced down. I don't understand what is
Sure.
difficult for a child to understand what they like and don't like. Their side, they're shackled to something and are unable to explore. The third thing is parents on our side. On our side of the house, parents are far more leeway to allow their children to explore. Their side, it's confined. The second thing is why is autonomy over identity formation exclusive to us and winning in this debate? And it can trump over anything they tell you. Like, even if there's confusion, why does it still win? The first thing I want to highlight is political debate. Literally, them saying there's discourse about gender on social media. As a child, at the very least, when you look at things like this on social media, you don't feel confined to a certain thing. You don't feel like because you're a man, you have to support a certain political belief like Andrew Tate. You find leeway in your freedom of expression and belief. The second thing is it is a human right in of itself to be able to like explore your identity and explore your interests. It is principally unjust for them to admit children must be confined. They need to accept this burden and say why it's okay. The third thing I want to highlight is it is unjust, and it's not just another generation. The issue is that before 18, it is your formative years. It is your chance to develop your identity. As a child, it is far more beneficial for you to be able to develop your passions and
Sure.
interests, know what's right and wrong for you, know if you want to marry a woman or a man or whatever it is. The point being is when you are not shackled to this, you can develop passions that can give you many career opportunities in the future. That is an exclusive benefit to us. The implication is first proved to you. Societal constructs are far more harmful on their side. And number two, that on our side of the house, we give people far more freedom of expression. The next thing I want to deal with is on their push on racism and whatnot and saying that racism still exists. One, okay, how do they change it? The only thing their first speaker did was muddy up this debate by saying racism exists on both sides. But second, note what kind of societies still have racism to such a large extent. They are very bigoted and conservative societies. How then do we disfranchise power from them? The simple reason is this: these societies are very patriarchal in nature. The way and their fundamental
You
belief
are.
in the way they function is by making children believe in things like the patriarchy from a young age due to things like gender constructs. When we strip away that power from them and children don't feel obligated to buy into it, it is the moment you take away power from it. The second layer of response I want to take down from is when they say there's better advocacy for intersectional groups on their side of the house. This issue exists because of rigid gender lines drawn. Now anyone who doesn't fit in this parameter is outcasted. Like if you are a man, you cannot support the feminist movement. The problem exists in status quo that harms them. But beyond attempts of advocacy, OP has no resolution at all. How do we solve this in our world? The way we solve it is common communal experience. There are three things here. The first is anyone might face harm assumed as women. Anyone might be unfairly imposed like with certain customs with an assumption. So they truly understand the pain and suffering the counterpart suffered from. Two, this is the tipping point that convinces people to create protective mechanisms for people around because they once suffered the same. Three, the quality of advocacy in buy-in is much greater rather than separating men and women and gender minorities who don't share the same problems or belittle the other problems. The next thing that they claim is identity dissonance. There are two responses we have to this. The first thing I want to highlight is that in Op's world, you are assigned a gender. You get contradicting signs. You are more confused than ever because you're fighting to be different against a fixed standard. Two, on the
You are.
comparative 18 years no of your life, you explore, identify, and associate yourself with the most suitable gender. Whatever eventually reveals itself at 18, you are confident and you are sure because you have gone through everything: school, childhood. You know what construct you identify the most with. This is independent from any external imposition. We eradicate the dissonance. Opposition further perpetuates and traps people forever. This is why transgendered individuals exist, because they are forced into certain constructs and gender roles. The next thing is, why don't gender norms apply to that many people after they turn 18? This is response to Op1. There are three things here. One, it is irrational to remove investments families members have made. For example, if
You
a
are.
guy pursued art when he was a kid and becomes an artist as a man, the family's investments into that career would be pointless if he didn't continue. Second, adults are less malleable. They possess critical thinking and whatnot. Third, even if presumably after you are 18 deciding your gender and etc., like you spend 18 years of exploring what it is to be a man and a woman, so you are more sure in it. The next thing is I want to bring
You
up
are.
why we are able to get rid of things like incel mindsets and why we are able to get rid of things like gender violence. The first primary reason why we see gender-based violence and incel mindsets accrue is because at a young age, the patriarchy teaches you that as a man, you must opt into it. But second, gender-based violence and incel mindsets typically accrue in the first place because at a young age, you generalize one certain gender. You generalize all women to be horrible and you absolutely hate them. Why then is this eliminated on our side of the house? The first primary reason is that we are able to eliminate it because men at a young age in their formative years when developing this mindset can't generalize women in the first freaking place because who are you generalizing? It eliminates their gender also according to the info slide. Number two, at a young age as a man, you don't feel forced to opt into incels or Andrew Tate's or patriarchal mindsets or gender-based violence. You don't feel like you have to be violent as a man or soft as a woman. You feel the courage to fight back up because you're able to opt into your own identity and don't feel confined. The weighing is here first. Opposition is only highlighting existing problems that are causing people to suffer. This model does not induce any unique additional problems. But second, on the comparative, we saw multiple outcomes strategically. For all those reasons, it's a clear proposition ballot.
Thank you so much for that speech. I'd like to call upon Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the op case. Here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Verbal POIs. The human instinct is to categorize oneself. It is the only way we make sense of our place in this world. To rob individuals of something so vital to their being not only kills momentum for society to fix problems endemic to these categories, it takes away the ability for people to know who they are. Proposition does not liberate children from the shackles of gender. You obscure infallible truths about their biology from them until they feel no longer the need to change anything within their societies. Two main clarifications, three actually. First, they misunderstand our case. Let's clarify on the fight for advocacy. We explained to you in first that it was more important to instigate these experiences within you from a young age and instill the injustices or instill the specific experiences of your gender within you to make you care about the specific fights for your own gender from the offset. That was what uniquely it was going to incentivize youth to enter the fight for intersectionality or enter the fight to ensure that sexual identity was never something that factored into how they should decide their careers, how they should decide their future. It was the only way that we were able to deconstruct gender as a social construct as opposed to opposition where people feel more comfortable with upholding these things and preserving them because ultimately that was something that they would uniquely only be able to be beholden to when they were 18. Ultimately, it was under our side still that only when people experience these visceral things from the start of their birth and they are only late and these things were like uniquely assigned to them from the start that they actually feel care, that they actually proximate to these things and actually care about them. If you assign them later on when they turn 18, ultimately these are uniquely what turn people away from actually caring about issues. So if manosphere or right-wing advocacy still exists under your side of the house, it is people who only turn 18 and get to assign a gender that feel that like you have a reduced amount of care as in regards to these things and don't have the incentive to actually try and oppose them or make sure that they can be deconstructed within your societies. Secondly, the stakeholders of gender-based prejudice are still vulnerable under proposition. That is to say, after you turn 18, you are still vulnerable to the gender that is assigned upon you and you are still imprisoned by gender roles and familiar expectations. This is because as a child, even if you don't feel personally obligated to these things, you are already exposed to conceptions of what a woman should be. You are still exposed to conceptions of what a man should be. If you don't feel beholden to it yet, that's just because you don't have a gender identity yet. When it is assigned to you when you turn 18, it is still something that you realize is still going to identify with you within society, and it's still something that you ultimately have to subscribe to. We explained that the outcome for these people, aka every single person under proposition when they turn 18, is ultimately worse because we as a society move away from discussions of gender when they do not impact us from a young age, and we need discussions of gender to still exist within either side of society because it is still an endemic biological problem that affects every single one of us. Thirdly, in terms of the contradiction, they concede that it is a fundamental right to explore your interests and what you like or do not like, but it is their side that limits information about yourself until you are 18. It is their side that limits your capacity to figure out what your place is in this world in regards to your gender, in regards to your sexuality, these fundamental and vital parts of people that allow them to explain who they are within a context of a wider society. People need categories, people need some way to explain themselves when they try to justify who they are, because it is something that humans inherently crave. That's why we crave and chase these arbitrary social narratives that ultimately we can argue are still things that are fundamentally sure can cause some level of harm, but we still chase these things and still embrace them and crave them as relevant because they bring to us some level of comfort when we're able to explain who we are. One main response then on whether or not children still feel confined to these things. On proposition, again, you still feel confined because you still are raised in society where your parents tell you that what a girl should or should not do, and when you turn 18 and it turns out you are a girl, you still have conceptions of what people can or cannot do, even if you don't feel beholden to those expectations yet. You are when you turn 18. If society is really such a patriarchal dystopian hellscape as proposition claims to you, then these things will similarly be persisting in your mind and be integrated in every single action that you do, even if it only is imposed on you after you turn 18. They claim that our comparative is solely a rigidly enforced gender binary where if a man wears something adjacent to a shade of pink, he becomes a social pariah. But we explained to you why that was never the case, because gender is ultimately still a label game under opposition, and we were already on the way to forming a society where you can call yourself whatever you want regardless of your biology, because gender was always something that was socially imposed upon you and just wasn't inherent. If you don't want to conform to being male or female, if you don't want to do traditionally masculine or feminine things, our society was already on track to achieving this. Our queer and trans rights movements, our feminist movements to push away the gender binary and the societal expectations imposed upon us was already something that generated a large amount of urgency and care and status quo and ensured that people could actually pursue these things and live life the way that they wanted. their idea about societal constraints then is nonsensical when you can still do whatever you want in a gender society, and it was just fundamentally easier for you to do so under our side because you can find the words for it and whether or not this aligns with your lifestyle, with your specific experiences of the world. So if I am gender non-conforming, that is uniquely something that I am able to find in myself in my youth on the opposition side of the house, and that is going to form the lens for which how I interact with the world. So even if I don't do traditionally masculine or traditionally feminine things, that was still ultimately something that I could largely co-opt under opposition because gender is still whatever I want to call it to be. Secondly, this isn't a day one motion. You're not debating in a context where gender never existed and everyone lived in this utopian sexless world. You're implementing this in a society that was already patriarchal and sexist. So in the worst case, where indoctrination was so strong under our side, where every single aspect of your gender was brainwashed into you from birth, it will also be enforced with symmetrical degrees under opposition. The difference then will only be in time duration. You still get assigned a vagina when you're 18, and that is still a prison people are beholden to under your side. So let's compare that. Under our side, at the very least, even if gender norms was something so strictly enforced to the degree that you claim it is, and like the violations against women or men's individual autonomy and capacity to express themselves, explain to you why it was only under our side where these things existed and people recognize these as problems from youth that the problem could get better in the first place. When you're uniquely experiencing these things and realizing what's wrong with your life and how you can fix it, that is the only way that people get dissatisfied enough or get like sufficiently like proximate to these issues to try and fight for them in the future, to try and actually like collectivize and make sure that they don't have to subscribe to these norms, to like tell everyone that this isn't actually the way you should be living your life, that girls can like blue and boys can like pink or whatever norms that proposition doesn't want people to subscribe to. Ultimately, those were only things that could be fought for when you generated the sufficient amount of urgency to care and explain why they were detrimenting people's lives on such an individual level. But if under either side you are still able to take away from gender norms and still not able to, if under either side you could have already not subscribed to either form of the gender binary, it was uniquely under our side we were able to gain like any form of label or identity. We explained to you why that was so fundamentally important. Before 7, I'll take a POI.
I don't understand how you just magically said in your speech there are no gender constructs on your side of the house. You literally admitted from first that you have constructs that help students or young kids identify their identity. Doesn't that still mean you force people down certain career paths and you still concede to every single mechanism in our arguments?
You know, gender norms can exist in that people just want to call themselves male and female, right? You don't have to extend that all the way to which it determines how you should work or how you should live. Ultimately, these are really just labels that we call ourselves, and it is uniquely under our side where we are able to reduce those things to just labels as opposed to defining norms of how you should live your life. Because again, if the problems under our side were formed by such a severely patriarchal and like oppressive society, then ultimately the time frame of that occurring on your side will still be symmetrical, except delayed to when you turn 18. So we must debate in a context where people are somewhat able to freely discover their gender identities, and the only way in which they were able to form that conception of identity, regardless if it be male or female or gender non-conforming or any variety of sexual identity that you want to call yourself under, it was under our side where you were able to find that identity for yourself. It was only under our side where you're able to find that form of label and be sure of your place in this world. So under our side, insofar as any form of gender norm still exists, a harm still exists on proposition, we tell you it uniquely festered in more insidious ways when you try to take away the importance of gender. When femicide is labeled as murder instead, the discourse around these issues shy away from the core issue of how people who align with feminine identity still live within the patriarchy. For those reasons, and the fact that you should just know yourself, for those reasons, opposition.
Thank you so much for that speech. Now calling upon Government Whip to continue the prop bench here.
Am I audible for you?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I will start in my first word. Okay. One clarification at the top of my speech. Panel, what does op mean? Know yourself. It's knowing yourself, knowing what society says you must be or exploring your identity. Panel, on our side, children are given the freedom to explore. Why is it so difficult? I feel like opposition is insanely backward by saying that to know your passion, society must tell you what it is because of your gender. Our society is not on track of achieving this. No matter how liberal society is becoming, gender construct still exists. Things that are deeply rooted in parents' brain, i.e. culture, still exist. I don't know what second op is talking about. Like, what do you mean by laboring in your POI response? Panel, young girls who has dream of pursuing STEM in society can't anymore. A young boy who wants to go to the arts industry can't anymore because he just must be confused. Panel, you have activity at school where you can exploit. This is how you actually see is like you can actually exploit the thing on our side of the house, right? First clash then on advocacy as that's their biggest impact. Oppositions argue that advocacy only exists on their side because gender exists, because movement like feminism rely on sheer story and collective momentum. Few responses on this. Firstly, advocacy does not exist because category exists. It exists because harm and inequality exists. No, feminism emerged not to preserve the category woman, but to challenge material disadvantage imposed on people perceived as women, such as lack of education, right? The GBS does not erase the history of this harm, nor does it prevent people from recognizing or responding to inequality that still occurs. What it removes is the automatic production of new harm by stopping gender socialization during childhood. Secondly, sheer story do not disappear. They just stop being pre-written for people. Under the simulator, people can still face unfair treatment, pressure, or exclusion. Those experiences can still be talked about, shared, and used to push for changes. Advocacy can focus on what actually happened to people, how institutions behave, and what outcomes are unfair, instead of relying on fixed label. This can make advocacy eventually stronger because it is based on clear action and real treatment. Thirdly, this actually flipped their point on collective action. In the status quo, men often do not support women's issue because gender makes people feel separate from each other. It creates an us versus them narrative, right? Under the simulator, people grow up without seeing others as a different group. That makes it easier to care about unfair treatment because it feels like something that could happen to anyone, not just them. Op then say we still need to know gender because the problem is deep rooted. That gets the logic backward. Sweet response. Firstly, you do not need to keep using that category to fix the harm it causes. We already know gender has caused inequality, right? The solution is not to keep exposing children to the same system so we can recognize it again. The solution is to stop creating new harm while dealing with the old one. Secondly, deep-rooted problems are only deep because they are taught early and repeated from your childhood. If you keep gender visible in childhood, you are not studying a problem, you are reproducing it. The simulator does not erase history as we told you again and again, right? It just stops the cycle from even happening in the first place. Thirdly, we can still identify unfair outcome without early gender labels, right? We can look at who is denying education, who faces violence, the rights. These patterns can be addressed directly. You do not need to label children first in order to fix inequality later. So their whole only positive impact is raised in the first clash. This is why we win. Second clash then on deep-rooted norm. There's two main layers under this. The first layer then is let me deal with their biggest push from opposition is that discrimination still exists on our side because it is so deep-rooted. No, judge, that's their only response to our case. If I take that down, they're out. Firstly, deep-rooted discrimination does not survive on belief alone. It survives through early socialization and habit formation. Prejudice is made deep because it is learned when people are young, dependent, and cognitively malleable. The simulator cuts off this transmission mechanism. Even if some adults retain sexist relief, they cannot pass them on during the most powerful conditioning phase. I think discrimination that cannot reproduce itself weakens over generation. Secondly, delaying genders lets family no longer plan a child's life in advance. No one responds to this. When parents do not know whether a child is a boy or girl, no, they cannot build a fixed outcome like marry early or earn money only. The safest option is to prepare the children for everything, sending them to the best school, giving them the education, training skills, even vocational paths. This creates a default of maximum opportunity for everyone, and that is equality. Even if discrimination is only delayed, that delay doesn't matter. It still matters because childhood is when people face the most control, pressure, and harm. By delaying gender, we protect children from years of aggression, restriction, and trauma, right? Adults may still face bias, but we have coping mechanisms, so it's much better. Certainly, I think toxic masculinity is not an innate male trait to start with. It is a learned behavioral script, taught early and reinforced constantly, like the heroic thing, right? Boys are not told not to cry, to dominance, to suppress vulnerability, and to equate words with power. This teaching happens overwhelmingly during childhood when conformity is enforced and alternatives are punished. The GPS removed the category of the masculinity, right? That triggers the script during the most formative year. Without knowing who is supposed to be masculine, the script cannot be reliable assigned. Lastly, toxic masculinity relies on peer enforcement, no, and social policing, which only works when gender is visible and legible. Like boys shame other boys for being weak or feminine because everyone knows who is meant to perform masculinity. Under a simulator, this mechanism literally collapses. Children cannot police masculinity or any of the traits they mentioned if they cannot identify who's expected to be a man, right? The second layer that is talk about opposition states choice is still coerced because social norms still exist. For example, a child might be told men are heroic, so they later choose to be a man. Two response. Firstly, norm only coerce when they are targeted against you, at you. In a status quo, a child is told you are a boy, so be heroic, or you are a girl, so be caring and care about your family, right? Under a simulator, norms may exist, but they are not directed at any specific child. And because we told you that parents don't have the incentive to do so, they have the incentive to put more the safest option for them is to put all resources into one child because that's the safest one, right? Because that happened, norm cannot target them, right? Because no one knows who is meant to follow the norm without being singled out. Norms lose most of their forces in the first place. Secondly, even if someone chooses a gender that fits common norm, that does not mean the choice was forced. Many people freely choose traditional paths even today. What matters is that under a simulator, no option will close off during childhood. The person had access to education, skills, and experience without gender limits. A choice made after open development is meaningfully free, even if it actually aligns with social expectation. For that purpose, thank you.
Thank you for that speech. I'd like to call upon the last substantive speaker of the debate, Opposition Whip. Here.
I'll just assume I'm audible and visible. My 15-year-old under the gender blindness machine. I can still hear my father telling my mother that women belong in the kitchen, or men should be masculine and women should be feminine. We think all these things still happen, and we think that indirectly concedes to this. We tell you that gender constructs are created. So that's exactly how they work, and they work symmetrically under both sides. So the only relevant issue in this round is who can spearhead more efforts into helping the feminist movement or fighting for gender equality. We think we are decided as that. But before that, I want to two issues in the speech then. The first is on gender progress, and this is the entirety of proposition's pathway to victory. Don't let them fool you by their myriad of argument numbering. This is their only way to victory in the round. Two layers I want to deal with here. One, they could tell us in third that there is change within gender stereotypes. I want to take down this idea in four ways. One, given that the world is still overwhelmingly and unfortunately biased into gender norms, adults still act around them. So even if they're not, and taking this on the best case of this proposition, even if they don't direct these norms towards children, children still consume content, they consume literature, but more importantly, they see how adults act around them. They have no other people to look up to.
QI.
How their adults function. So their adults function in a patriarchal or stereotypical way. That is how they're going to grow up as well. Secondly, now with the gender blindness machines, structures and adults have even more incentive to push gender norms onto children in the first place. It's unclear as to why this wouldn't happen. So lastly, within the content children assume still has gender
QI.
don't let them strawman the race claim. All Arjun said was that individuals, even in their best case of this proposition, default to segregating based on the identities of race or other types of identity that you might identify yourself as. The second layer will explain why the advocacy for women or like gender equality will become worse on their side. And this is the true real harm in the round. Reasons why this happens. One, I want to note that society already has progressed towards the conception of gender. We understand that gender can be somewhat fluid and there's like progress in the feminist movement. But secondly, the conception of gender that you develop still exists after you become 18. Just because I flip open the machine and see what gender I am does not mean that I deconstruct my conceptions of gender that I've grown up in. We can see this in the status quo already. Many women have internalized misogyny with how they've grown up. It is unclear why this happens. But secondly, policy change also becomes far less, and this was uncontended in the entire round. Society is overwhelmingly empathetic towards children. The politicians push policies by saying save our kids.
Point.
That people buy into policy and buy into change because they're empathetic towards children. So the change becomes far more prevalent when you have this discrimination against children. But secondly, there is also more urgency because individuals will feel empathetic for this. And lastly, we get critical mass under our sides when students come out to protest, and this is important for the movement. Lastly, their only response to this was that individuals are not going to support feminism because they are shackled.
Point of information.
Unfortunately, this is unclear why this will change because individuals will still buy into gender stereotypes. You can still go onto the manosphere when you're 14. You can still buy into Andrew Tate's idea. You can still buy into it despite you turning out to become a woman. You don't deconstruct it when you reach 18 years old. But lastly, there's more urgency to fight against the patriarchy on a comparative because the harms of patriarchy has harmed you throughout your childhood. Then, this is the prerequisite to their entire benefit. We spearhead the advocacy for women and gender.
Point of information.
That's what makes us win the round. Before the way and the second issue, I'll take the point.
The way gender blindness works is that you don't know your mother is a woman, so all mentions of gender when you're a kid are irrelevant. All of your points don't stand.
No, this is not how this works. I think you need to reread the motion. You can still see gender adults acting in a gender way around you, and that's how you build the conceptions of it. But even if this wasn't true, this isn't a retrospective motion. We think you can still there's still gender things that happen within the status quo then, and we can still do this in the round. We can still have gender stereotypes with children grown up in them in the round. But also the literature they consume, the art they consume, these are all entrenched in patriarchal stereotypes. I think that's sufficient to prove that this is a wash in the round. And the true harm and the true benefits you take into consideration, judge, is the advocacy for women then. Onto the weighing. Even if you believe that nothing we say is about it getting worse is somewhat tangible in the round, then there is also still no benefit on the side of proposition. There's no change under their side. On their side, it is all speculation then. Onto the second issue on the identity formation of children and why this is so important. One, I want to give you two reasons why this is so important. One, children build a conception of self and their identity when they were young, so it's incredibly important towards them because they're in an extremely weird state because they are trying to feel like they belong into the world, so they need this identity here. But secondly, I think this proposition misunderstands our argument. Our argument wasn't the straw manner they said that gender determines how you should act or how your career opportunities. We think that's insane. But we explained that you can explore what that gender means as a part of your identity. This grounds you and feels comfort for you within the society then. But secondly, we explained that gender is becoming increasingly more malleable in the status quo just because it is more fundamental in the youth of these children because their self-actualization within that. But also, we think we can explore what that gender means in their youth, so in the first place, this becomes far better then because they have more time to explore what their gender means within the youth. But thirdly, when they also break gender stereotypes within this, then it becomes far better
on our side. What is the weighing onto this? At best, they get no change on the identity issue, but at worst, we get the like on the best case on our side, we're able to get the benefit of children self-actualizing, feeling grounded in the reality of their identity within the world, and this is so important for them then. We think it is very important for this to happen because they have no other benefit within the round. We explain why this is true. Even if you don't believe any of this, we as a society already don't conceal information from you. We gave the principal, Parallel, and Arjun to no response that we don't conceal information about genocide because you are still beholden towards that information. And that information is even more crucial when it's such an inherent part of your own identity, when it's such an inherent part of you and how you shape your how you shape your own personality. We think it's extremely important for you to provide this sort of information towards the individuals. Then, what is the weighing of the two issues in this round? And I want to take a look at how we win this round. One, they say there is no if there is no change in gender stereotypes and all within the round on the issue of this round should be the advocacy for women. But let's say even if you have no increased advocacy for women, why does it still happen better under our side? Because we think firstly, children can build empathy within their childhood when they get the first-hand experience onto this. But two, this means that disproportionately only women who are, for example, born lower social economic backgrounds will advocate for the movement because they don't feel that when they are growing up. They don't feel the empathy towards other women when they're speaking out about it. But the last thing is just far worse because they continue to perpetuate patriarchal identities and stereotypes to their other friends because it is a negative feedback loop, but they don't feel empathetic towards the individuals who are suffering within the world because they just think that won't be me when I find out my age and that I find out my gender when I reach the age of 18. We don't think there's any tangible change, but even if there's change, it's a much worse change under their side. Then the second part of the weighing is simple. We think we can weigh on scale insofar as we can benefit the majority of individuals, and the majority of individuals who are suffering under patriarchal oppression, they were able to get better policies on the standard of children. So even if you don't believe the multiple mechanisms we have given to you, just the number one thing that individuals have to put a lot of their policies on the idea of protecting the children is already enough. We saw a UK law being passed that misogynistic, teachers should teach misogyny to their teach misogyny is bad towards their students because they want to protect the kids. We think that is extremely important. Policies for gender are more likely to be passed on the grounds of children, and we think that is better for the change of the feminist movement. For all those reasons, we think you should oppose.
Thank you for that speech. We're now going to be heading into the reply section of the debate. So opposition, reply whenever you're ready.
This entire proposition team misunderstands a few fundamental things. The confusion and rage you feel when you want to become an engineer, but society tells you no, you should become a teacher, is the exact mechanism of social change, not only for feminist policies, but for intersectionality. The feminist fight was never just a fight against stereotypes, as proposition confined it to. It was a fight against a discriminatory society, the same society that breeds homophobia, racism, and class discrimination. If, in their best case, they remove gender stereotypes, they also remove a component of advocacy needed to fight against all others. From first, we made it clear that it was the unique relatability and proximity you felt as a young woman, seeing the discrimination and harm onto other women, that brought you the urgency to fight. Even if you were a white woman, you recognize the form of solidarity with people of color women because you were both women. You were still empowered to fight for them. And even if proposition achieves their sexless society, humanity self-segregates in different ways that have less capacity to fight. Bigotry still exists and will find other ways to manifest. They have never dealt with this throughout all three speeches. Few strategic observations then. I want to note that third speaker concedes that toxic masculinity is not a trait you are born with, but a trait that you learn. We questioned this from first, right? Even if you don't know what gender you are, what stops you from sympathizing with the ideas pushed forward by Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson? When you don't know what the unique experience of being a girl is, you are far more likely to buy into the idea that men have done a lot for society and have contributed more. And because there are less people speaking out about it around you, because they also don't have that same relatability to the experience of a woman, there's more likely to that you buy into these concepts. We questioned this, but they did not respond. They only said, oh, but because you're born, you don't know what you are. You just won't buy into these things. We further pushed you that these influences will just manifest their bigotry in other forms that target other things like actual like other minorities. They didn't question this as well. They did not engage. Secondly, second speaker concedes that it is a fundamental right to explore interests, but their side denies information about yourself until you're 18, similar to how they deny all our POIs. Then it is unclear why your ability to pursue your passions is preserved when you aren't fully aware of who you are until that arbitrary age of 18. We told you that forms of identity like race and gender do make up the identity of someone not for any malicious reason, but because it is genuinely important to celebrate your identity, to consume literature from your identity. We, for example, would not ban individuals from identifying as a Black individual or identifying from a minority group because we recognize it is a core part of them and it should not be restricted because it is crucial in their development throughout childhood as well. They say that, oh, when you're in childhood, you get exposed to all these things and then you get traumatized until your adulthood. Those are not manifestations of things that are harmful. Those are things that are core to your individuality and core to how you perceive the world when you grow up. The harms that you perceive when you were young are things that you carry forward and allow you to engage with the world in adulthood in a better way, but you get denied those things on their side. Third, our society isn't one that is failing to fight gender stereotypes. We give you multiple examples and structural reasons why women are represented now more than ever in STEM and in other fields like leadership. This proves our side had a positive trend in favor of women, and proposition has not justified the urgency to implement this or why such a drastic measure is necessary given we gave you all this analysis. Finally, this debate was simple. Our central claim was that blinding yourself from gender weakens your fight against discriminatory structures. We proved this through one, because we had a stronger feminist movement on our side, because people under the 18 tend to be the most emotional supporters of the feminist movement and are also not bound to jobs that would restrict them. And secondly, stories of discrimination resonate with a larger body of people because you're now of that gender and can relate to this. To this, propositions say that when you don't know what gender you're born with, you're more likely to be sympathetic. But this was unproven. We told you that sympathy is generated when you're able to understand the pain and suffering faced by minorities. Given all of these things, even in Proposition's best case, is it worth removing the problem of gender stereotypes if the harm is to be robbed of a core part of your identity? This was their entire second argument brought to all three speakers. They did not engage. But the ability to explain yourself to the world is something uniquely offered under under opposition. Children were only able to explore that when they were provided a framework to their own to interpret the world from the start and not denied a core part of their identity. Because of this, the dissonance that causes young individuals on their side is, I think, what leads them to the confusion that you have to wait until you're 18 to fully explore your identity. We do not restrict individuals in such immoral ways. Side with opposition.
Thank you for that speech. Now calling upon the last speech in this debate, Proposition reply.
Okay, I'm audible, right?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'll start on my first word. Panel, opposition is right. Children are very confused. They are confused when you are told as a young girl you can't pursue STEM because of the fact that you have a vagina. You are told as a young boy you cannot cry, you cannot feel emotion, you must be violent. That is far more confusing. Being shackled and not allowed to experience your own autonomy of choice is far more confusing. Being confused why your gender must limit everything is far more confusing at the age of 18. They lost the moment that there was that main prong from third to second to first. The first thing I want to take down is their incentive to enter the advocacy. Note before weighing, I would like to point out this massive contradiction down the proposition bench. First, they say you need to know your identity to join the fight. Then they say, no, they will reduce this gender to merely a label. Only one of this premise can be true, panel. The repercussion of this contradiction in op is that nothing can fully manifest. Either one of their benefits has to manifest over the other. Position says we put them into a gender, then we let them fight their battles. 4 issues with this. 1, how are they going to do this? They can see that the patriarchy is strong and more powerful than movements fighting against. Second, why is this fight being a woman to get equality with men likely going to be successful? Radio silence. They just assume it would happen. Third, there's no incentive structure to why men who enjoy the advantage and power using the patriarchy will be willing to relinquish this power all of a sudden now. Fourth, it doesn't matter even if they see other adults' behavior. It will always be mixed. And most importantly, children are not indoctrinated to a certain gender, so they're still exploring. Monkey see monkey, copy becomes worse on op. When you're told you are a boy and they see a boy doing those things, that's when they feel those actions are legitimized like being sexist. What do we explain the comparative? Why is it successful? We told you that the tipping point is that when you don't have a gender, you may face harms that men face to be strong. A woman faces through discrimination and abuse. A gender minority would face when being made fun of. This accumulated overlapping negative experience among different genders genders you face is what opens your eyes towards the harms and suffering they go through. Because you know how painful it is to be a man or a woman or a gender minority, that is when you want to create a gender and protection for all. Because at 18, you don't know what gender you end up, you likely fight for all the better encompassing things. The survival incentive for self-protection benefits all. This was opposition's only Hail Mary. We completely flipped and proved it wrong. The next thing that they say is the harm still exists after 18. Couple of issues with this. One, in ops worlds, these structures are permanent fixtures. Two, we eradicate all gender-related abuse and trauma from birth till 18. Third, young people are vulnerable and fragile. Being made fun is far more harmful for you. For 18 years, we can certainly prevent it. The long-term benefit is that not knowing your identity gives you fluidity like yin and yang. Second, girls gain confidence to stand up against men because they're not limited by the belief of I'm just a girl. Third, men feel like they can cry, they can do what they want now. You have practiced and embraced this norm in life that normalizes these behaviors for you, so you no longer inhibit yourself from expressing yourself. Now, what did my first say that got no response? One, even if these structures are only moved or delayed, we still win because families cannot build a predetermined outcome of life for their children. So if you don't know if you're a girl or a boy, you will always prepare the best for them. Second, even if end up like women not being uplifted, since they at least access things like education and potential, families now want to use the skill to uplift the family and contribute. Third, you have more autonomy at 18. You can move out, you can eradicate anything that happens. What did my first say then that got no response? One, problems with status quo. Notice how their only response is saying we are becoming more liberal now. Oh, I'm sorry, not every single country is the United States of America. Biological things like hormones, identity formation only happens by the time you are 18. Notice how all these things are independent. Second, I want to note the internalization of identity. When you are a kid, you are the most malleable and cannot defend against gender norms. Things like incels only happen when children internalize these patriarchal beliefs from a young age. We had won on two fronts. One, we proved to you we eliminate all harms from a young age. Second, we proved to you we give them the unique benefit of the exploration of their identity. They claim that children are going to be confused. I posit you are more confused when you're shackled and imprisoned. For all of those reasons, it is a clear proposition ballot. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that speech, and thank you so much for the debate. So obviously we won't be releasing results now. It will be in the closing ceremony, I believe. So the judges and I think, will head into one room. I think let's go into room 5. But anyway, thank you guys for the round. And congratulations to both teams for making it this far.
Good debate, guys.